I've tried the last like 3 years to read 100 books in a year, and it just has not happened ever. So I'm gonna go back to my regular reading goals and now watch. As soon as I do that, when I'm not actively trying, I'm gonna read 100 books in 2025. However, it has always been quality over quantity, and I read so many amazing books this year, even if I didn't read 100 of them. I also feel like we had banger after banger for Creepy Book Club this year, and I'm super proud of that, and I'm very excited about our picks for next year. You can find Creepy Book Club on the Storygraph app. The link is in my description, and as it is the end of the year, getting into the new year, I would like to just like plug completely on my own, not sponsored. Nobody asked me to do this. I'm just a huge fan of the Storygraph app. Maybe consider transferring your Goodreads data to Storygraph and using that in the new year, and ditching Goodreads because it's owned by Amazon and Amazon sucks. Again, not sponsored, just a fan. You can also follow me personally on the Storygraph if you like, to see what other things I'm reading, because for this video I'm keeping it to my top 10 books of the horror, mystery, thriller variety. And in past years I've broken this list up between front list and back list titles. I am just gonna do a straight like 10 to 1 ranking, which was totally not super hard to do. So coming in at number 10 is Third Shift Society by Meredith Moriarty. This is the first volume printing of a webtoon that I had started to read at one point. I got a good ways into it, definitely not as far as this volume covers, and I think it just dropped off for me because I got too busy, and I stopped keeping up with it as much, and nothing bad, no bad reason I stopped reading it, it just happened. And then I saw that it got a physical printing, so I was like, well, what better excuse to just read this again. So in the story we're following Ellie, who finds out she has psychic powers, and these psychic powers land her a job with Ichabod here, and they like solve paranormal mysteries. It's very like Scooby-Doo-esque. I love the fact that her employer is just like this jack-o'-lantern headed dude. There's no explanation yet as to why that is. It's just like a thing, but I like it, and it's just like fun, kind of cozy, Halloween-y type vibes. Highly recommend. Number 9 for me is Black Sheep by Rachel Harrison. We read this for Creepy Book Club, and I ended up reading this in one sitting by lantern light during Hurricane Milton, and it was pretty easy to do, honestly. Really easy to read in one sitting. So the book follows Vesper, who was part of a like religious cult, grew up in a religious cult, but wanted to break free and do her own thing, and was thus excommunicated. She gets a mysterious invitation to come back to the community for a weekend for a wedding, and that's unheard of in this community, so Vesper goes back to figure out what's going on. I won't spoil a certain reveal that happens like very early on in the story, but it was such a fun twist on what we would normally think of when we think of a religious cult in a really funny way. And I feel like there's usually an element of humor in Rachel Harrison's books that I really enjoy, but I particularly love how she writes her protagonists. They are usually pretty complicated characters, messy, not 100% the most lovable people, but I love that. I love a slightly challenging character. Vesper is definitely one. She's not an easy character to like, but I like that because it just seems realistic. Nothing wrong with having just like a true blue, all good character, but that's like boring if every book had like just a perfect godlike character as the protagonist. My number 8 pick is My Darling Dreadful Thing by Joanna Van Veen. This was a Creepy Book Club pick for us this year. This book follows Roos, who ends up kind of being sold to this recent widow, but it's a chance for her to get away from her abusive mother, so she takes it. The book is told in retrospect, as Roos is part of a murder investigation, and through a good portion of the book we don't know who it is that was murdered. But then the fact that Roos has an undead companion that she can see and speak to complicates things. Tons of sapphic yearning in this, but it's the type of yearning that comes to fruition, so that's awesome for us. Love the gothic sapphic vibes in this. It's incredible. Lots of bog bodies in this. I feel like Joanna really likes a bog body. I don't know what that says about her, but I like it. Definitely very creepy and dark. The vibes of this very much reminded me of Crimson Peak. Like all of the vibes except for like the incest vibes. Those are not in this book. All the other vibes though, very much felt like this. I just enjoyed that this was a kind of different take on a traditional ghost story or traditional haunting, and the fact that it was all told in retrospect the way it was had me on my toes, like wanting to figure out like who it was that was murdered, what's gonna be the result of the investigation. Great debut book. Also, this is a debut book from this author, and I think that's incredible. Coming in at number 7 for me is Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle. This book follows Rose, who starts seeing the most horrifying demon ever every time she thinks of girls. That's pretty much the premise. No, her visions of these demons all seem to stem from this gay conversion camp that operates in her small town. This is a very on the nose kind of interpretation of the demons that LGBTQ youth end up with when they are forced to go through gay conversion therapy. But Chuck Tingle manages to do this like somewhat simple premise in a really horrifying way, but with a lot of heart as well. And when I say horrifying, I mean horrifying. The description of the demon, so scary. And it's scary in a way that's like when you're witnessing it happening, like when you're reading it happening in the book, you're kind of like, okay, I get why this might be effective conversion therapy. Not that I'm endorsing that in any way, of course. But you're like, yeah, that might scare me to act a certain way. Fuck. It's super creepy. I also really liked the cast of characters, strong found family vibes. I always love a found family. And in a lot of ways, Rose's character arc reminded me a lot of Megan in But I'm a Cheerleader, which is one of my favorite movies ever. But obviously this is a much darker version of that story. But there's some similarities between those two. I feel like that was some inspo. Not confirmed though, I don't know. All right, number 6 for me is Out There Screaming, which is an anthology edited by Jordan Peele. And this is an anthology specifically of new Black horror stories. And honestly, it's incredible. The stories range so vast and they cover like multitudes of horror, from realistic horror to supernatural elements to folklore to sci-fi. Like, when I say there's something for everybody in this anthology, there truly is something for everybody in this anthology. And if I were to rank the individual stories like throughout the book, like even my like least preferred ones are still awesome. Like I didn't hate a single story in this, which is kind of rare for an anthology, like with such a mixed bag. Even if it's one author, or if it's like this one and it's multiple authors, there's bound to be ones that you don't vibe with, but that was not the case, like truly not the case. And there were a lot of authors I was familiar with that are featured in this book, like Tananarive Due, N.K. Jemisin, Rebecca Roanhorse. And then there were a whole lot that I hadn't had the pleasure of reading before, and I feel like anthologies are a really nice way to introduce yourself to an author. Sometimes you just want to see what their writing style is like, and I think anthologies are a really fun way to do that. And if you're somebody who likes to do that too with anthologies, I would highly recommend Out There Screaming. Moving into the top 5, I have an anthology of a slightly different variety. It came from The Closet: Queer Reflections on Horror, which is edited by Joe Valise. This is a collection of personal essays from various different writers, obviously about horror movies and how said horror movies helped these writers maybe identify with a part of themselves, or reconcile with a part of themselves, obviously like within their queer identity. Each chapter is from a different author, and most of them are about like a single horror movie in particular and the impact that that horror movie had on the writer. I loved the personal aspect to it. Like all the essays like had that personal, like anecdotal kind of like the first time I saw this horror movie, da 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 da. And then there are deeper reflections on the themes of those horror movies, like now that a particular writer is like reflecting on it now. So it's like after having seen it a bajillion times because I connected with it so much, like here's kind of my interpretation of the film. And there's a lot, like pretty much every single chapter, I think with the exception of a few, like I had seen the movie before. Pretty much all of them, it was like brought up takes on these movies that I had never thought of before. Amazing, and just amazing analysis of these horror movies, and then reading the personal stories was also really impactful. If you love the horror genre, you love the fact that it's a genre that people from marginalized groups can really connect with and find community in, which I feel like if you're subscribed to this channel, you definitely agree with that. Then I feel like you would really love this book. I highly recommend it. It's so good, and it'll get you some nonfiction in your reading list for the new year if you're so inclined. All right, in the number 4 spot for me is Murder Your Employer by Rupert Holmes. This is a mystery book about a very secretive school in which students learn the art of, well, murder. Not necessarily just murdering your employer. The entire school is not for that. That's like one kind of course track you can take. It's just like a fun, really fun, almost kind of like heist style story, but it's not a heist, it's murder. But you know what I mean, like that kind of vibe. It kind of gives Ocean's 11 at certain points, like just like kind of that vibe. Lots of twists and turns. I thought the story was really clever and so much fun. Like I am not exaggerating when I say I laughed out loud reading this book, and I have witnesses to this, and hopefully they're going to be in the comments and corroborate my story. But on our Patreon, we have a monthly just like little hangout where we sit with each other on Discord and we read. Like it's just like quiet, I play chill music and we're just all reading our individual books, and it's a really lovely time. In one of those hangouts, I was reading this book and I was legitimately laughing to the point where people pointed it out. Like they could, like my mic was off, but they could see me laughing. And it was at this book because it was genuinely so funny. Like, and I can't name any other books that elicited that reaction out of me. So if you're in for like a fun kind of mystery, a fun kind of like Knives Out kind of mystery that's really, really funny, highly recommend Murder Your Employer. Top 3 time next on my list is My Favorite Thing is Monsters Book 2. I'm so happy we got this year. I have gushed at length about the first book in this duology, My Favorite Thing is Monsters. I will link the video up here so you can hear me talk about it for a little bit longer, and I talk about the backstory of this amazing graphic novel and how it was created. So this is a story in 2 volumes. The ending is very definitive in this, so I know we're not getting another one, but the story follows Karen Reyes, who is navigating her own struggles and like kind of finding her identity and like feeling like she doesn't really fit in, while also trying to solve the murder of a most beloved neighbor in her apartment complex. And all of this taking place in Chicago in the 1960s. The art is absolutely incredible, and the story is so stunning. So the idea of it, like the reason why it kind of looks like a notebook, is because it's supposed to be set up like this is Karen's diary. Like these are her entries. So we see her writing, her art, and we see how she sees herself as this kind of like werewolf-esque creature. She's a big fan of horror. So, you know, we have a kindred spirit in Karen. The art is just absolutely incredible. I love the story. Lots of themes of kind of like feeling like an outsider, maybe not loving yourself or learning to love yourself. That's definitely Karen's story arc there, and a lot of queer themes as well. I can't talk about this enough. Like honestly, I feel like everybody should read this graphic novel. Everybody should read My Favorite Thing is Monsters. You will be better for it. All right, here we go. My number 2 pick is another book that I definitely remember in a previous video talking about at length, and it is An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. So this is a Carmilla retelling, but it's set in a college in the 1960s, and Carmilla and Laura are academic rivals. When I tell you the rivals to lovers arc is so scrumptious. This is like the blueprint for what enemies to lovers should be. Like, honestly, like, everybody should take notes. Like, this is how it is written. Loved the dark academia aspect, loved the arc of the characters. I loved the romance in this, obviously, too. And while this isn't like a straight like romance book, like this isn't in the romance genre, that's not like the main focus of the book, the romance is delicious. And it is a little bit spicy as well. I was kind of surprised. So I do feel like there's truly something for everybody in this book. It's dark, it's scary, it's spicy. It's also just really well written. Like, it had me giggling and kicking my feet like at every at every page. So good. Possibly my favorite Carmilla retelling, like amongst everything. Shows, books, movies. I think this is my favorite. Like, it's so well done. And finally, my number one pick is a book that quite literally broke us all at Creepy Book Club, and that is The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. This book follows two siblings living in Florida in the Jim Crow era. We have Robbie, who is sent away to a reformatory school after kicking his white neighbor in the shin, and then his older sister Gloria, who is like rallying as many people as she can together to try and get Robbie out of the reformatory school. But while in the reformatory school, Robbie sees ghosts, particularly like ghosts of former students, and this catches the eye of the vicious, absolutely horrific man of a warden. So this book is based in part on the infamous Dozier Boys School in Marianna, Florida, a very real school. You can look it up online and look up the history. Incredibly sad and tragic, and as such, the themes in this are so heavy, and it was made even worse like when you're reading it and you're just thinking about the very real schools that this is based off of. But Tananarive Due truly is a master at her craft, and she handles the material like with respect and really tells a beautiful story in the end. There's bits in there like when you're going through it, like I cried multiple times reading this book. Some parts were incredibly hard to get through just because it was just so vicious and so violent in the worst way. You know, it's like hate-filled violence. It's just it's the worst. But it's just an incredible book. And I feel like Tananarive Due, like, don't get me wrong, like I love that she's in my horror section at work. I love that every day when I get to go fix my section, I get to look at her books, and because I love her so much. But I feel like her work truly, like really truly transcends genre, and this book is no different. It is horrifying, yes, but it's more than that, really. I obviously recommend any of the books on this ranking to any of you, but if you don't read anything else from this list, read The Reformatory. There you have it. Those are my favorite books that I read this year. Of course, I want to know what your favorites were, and if you read any of the books on my list, and what did you think about them, and did you meet your reading goal? If you set one, they're obviously not required. So there'll be I say pause, not a pause in videos. There will be like a slight pause in the ranking videos. As I've mentioned a couple of times before, I'm just waiting for Nosferatu to come out. So my big last video of 2024 will be a ranking of 2024 horror movies. And that one's gonna kind of be a long video, I think, because I don't feel satisfied with just talking about 10 movies. We had so many incredible horror movies this year. So it might be a top 20 list. Like, I think I'm gonna have to just do the thing and do a top 20. I think it's required. But that's coming. I have some other videos planned in the meantime until Nosferatu comes out. So I will see you next week with more videos. Until then, stay strange. Bye.